Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Magic Duels. This week we are taking a look at an Emeria Shepherd Reanimation deck. So this was a deck idea that was submitted to us by one of our subscribers. And I figured, instead of making it a subscriber deck, since it was more of a deck building challenge, I might as well just make it for this week. So, the key card is Emeria Shepherd. So, 7 mana, pretty ridiculous to pay for on hard cast, but we won't be doing that, which is great. Flying 4/4 with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return target non-land permanent from your graveyard to your hand. If that land is a plains, you may return that non-land permanent to the battlefield instead. So essentially, if we get her down on turn 6 using Ever Afters or Necromantic Summons and play a plains, then we can get all these lovely creatures back in with her. So she's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, the basic structure of the deck is to get an Emeria Shepherd out, play a plains, and get either an Ulamog, an Omnath, a Gaia's Revenge, a Linvala, or even a Sorin. We can get a Sorin back with the Emeria Shepherd, which is what makes her so great in a reanimation deck. It's any non-land permanent, so we've taken advantage of that a little bit. But let's just check the front of the curve. So we have Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Most of you know him by now. Old Jacey Poo. So you can draw a card and discard a card. This is the main reason we want him here, to loot out our big creatures and put them in our graveyard if they fall into our hands, for example. And if there's 5 or more cards in your graveyard, which is a lot of self-milling, so the moment you've got Jace, it's quite likely the turn after you're going to be flipping him, then you get to return him to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. And then you get this side. So he's +1, you can sort of pseudo lock down a creature. That's quite useful, but the main thing we want him for is to be able to cast instant and sorceries from our graveyard. If they would be put into your graveyard, they get exiled instead. However, the card is bugged, so they don't get exiled. So I'll do my best to follow the rules, but I do have a memory of a fish, so sometimes I might potentially click on the card that should have been exiled at that point, but what do I know? But yeah, that's the main uses of him. We'll never use his ultimate, but there it is if you want to read it. Moving on, we have the Vessel of Paramnesia, a 2-mana enchantment that says pay 1, sacrifice it, put 3 cards from your library into your graveyard and draw a card. So this is a bit of a self-mill. It's not the best self-mill we've got, but it is a permanent, so it does allow us to get it back with Emeria Shepherd. So if we've got an Emeria Shepherd down, and we don't have creatures to reanimate with her, which is quite unfortunate, but it does happen, then we can get a vessel back instead and start milling away, and our lands will allow us to keep cycling this back until we get a creature. So it allows us to get into our bigger stuff a lot quicker that way. It's only a one-of because, as I said, it's not that useful, but in situations where you don't have a full graveyard or you need a certain card in your graveyard, you know, this can be quite useful to keep cycling it back and through. So I have it as a one-off just because we can keep recurring it. Telling time. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand, 1 on top of your library and 1 on the bottom of your library. So this allows us, essentially the main reason it's in is to fix our mana. We are a 3-colour deck, although it will say that we have 5. So we want to be able to hit our mana on time, you know. We also want to be able to hit our reanimate spells, get the correct pieces of our combo together before turn 5, when we really should be reanimating or blowing up the board. Prized Amalgam. This is a good card. I'm not sure how well it fits into our deck, because this deck was really hard to get down to a 60, and I always felt like getting rid of the Prized Amalgams for some reason. To fit maybe some bigger creatures in, essentially, is what I was going with. Because there's a lot of big creatures that we didn't include. If I go to Mythics. Like Archangel Avacyn's not in here. Mind Rack Demon's not in here. You know, there's a lot of Green Warden's not in here. He used to be in here. And neither is Sire of Stagnation. So I thought maybe cutting these 2, but ended up leaving them in. And they do fine work. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, I don't think they're as good as a Sire on turn 6 with an Emeria Shepherd. But But yes, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard, which is quite likely, or you cast it from your graveyard, which is unlikely, return it from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of your end step. So if we've got 2 in, then we can get, the best case scenario is turn 6, we get an Emeria Shepherd in with a Rise from the Grave, for example, which triggers these two. These two will come in on our end step. We play a Plains, we get an Ulamog, for example. That's a super turn for us, and it does happen quite often. Olivia, mobilized for war. So she's a flying 3/3. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may discard a card. If you do, put a 1/1 counter on that creature. It gains haste until the end of the turn and becomes a vampire. So she is great. I absolutely love Olivia. She's quite a low cost. We don't have the red though, so I considered splashing 1 red so that we could get her down on turn 3, but I thought, she's only a 1-off. To splash for a 1 red seems a little wasteful when we could have a Plains instead. But she's in here mostly because if we get Olivia down with an Ever After, for example, she's going to come in with another big creature. For example, an Ulamog. If she comes in with an Ulamog, I can make Ulamog an 11/11 with haste that can attack the turn that I play him, which is mainly why she's in here. She can also discard for us as well, that's another reason. But yeah, she's really good. She's not a great defender, unlike, some of our heavier creatures that are 5/5 and gain us loads of abilities, but for her ability to give creatures haste and discard fodder is absolutely fantastic. Moving on. Oath of Jace. When Oath of Jace enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry X, where X is the number of planeswalkers you control. Oath of Jace is awesome. It draws us quite deep into our deck and allows us to discard creatures away, or even Drownyard Temples as well, which we can then recur and ramp into. We also do take advantage, kind of, with the upkeep. We have a potential to scry 2 because we have a Jace and we have a Sorin, and it's quite easy to get both of them out when we've got an Emeria Shepherd because we can actually just recur these creatures over. So Emeria Shepherd also can keep recurring Oath of Jace. If you play a Plains or even just play any land, I get Oath of Jace back and play it. The legend rule goes into effect. This hits our graveyard. Every single turn, potentially, we can be recurring Oath of Jaces, drawing into the cards we need, milling ourselves of the big creatures that we need to find. So it's absolutely awesome. Pieces of the puzzle is a key piece of the puzzle. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library, put up to 2 instants on sorceries from among them into your hand, the rest into your graveyard. So this card's bugged. Fortunately, however, most of the cards, the vast majority I'd say, are actually sorceries, because this card bug says that you can't get instants. So things like Telling Time you can't grab, and I think that's it actually. Yeah, that's the only card you can't grab with Pieces of the Puzzle in this deck, even with the bug, which is absolutely awesome. The main reason we grab Reanimator spells with the 2 cards that we're allowed to grab, and hopefully the other 3 are the big creatures that we want to find. So we're milling a lot in that regard. We can also mill the other instants and sorceries we don't want to grab, and we can get them back with a Possessed Scab as well. 4 mana, Languish. All creatures get -4/-4 until the end of the turn. Great board wipe. Can be grabbed back with a lot of things as well. Can't be grabbed with Emeria Shepherd though, because it's only permanents. I hope that there's a permanent board wipe. I think that would be kind of cool. There is the what's it called? Aligned Hedron Network. That is a permanent board wipe, kind of, but it only hits power 5 or greater, and that doesn't hit many cards in this format at the moment. So maybe if the format gets a little bit more expensive, I might think about including him, but yeah. So Possessed Scab. When Possessed Scab enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. If it would die, exile it instead. So Possessed Scab can get us back our Reanimate spells, he can get us back our board wipes. You can even get us back our creatures if we feel like playing them, which is quite unlikely. But that's the main reason he's in. If we actually mill him as well, we can reanimate him for free, kind of. Well, without wasting a card anyway, because the moment we reanimate him, we can use his trigger to get back the reanimate card, which is a cool little combo. Planar Outburst. Destroy all non-land permanents. Speaks for itself for the most part. We can potentially hit the Awaken cost. I have done it a few times in play testing. But for the most part, it's just a 5-mana board wipe. It's probably the key to keeping in this game, because a lot of the time we don't do anything except for self-mill up to turn 5. So at turn 5, we either want to be reanimating or wiping the board. So it's either Planar Outburst or Languish at that point, and then follow it up with a big creature after we've finished wiping the board. If we Necromantic Summons and get an Ulamog, for example, we can still Planar Outburst the turn after, since we won't lose it. But most of our cards, I think Ulamog's the only one who's not indestructible and susceptible to board wipes. None of them are susceptible to a Languish with a Necromantic Summons, though. Keep that in mind. The Emeria Shepherd will be a 6/6 with a Necromantic Summon, so Languish for our opponent will barely touch anything. All it'll touch really is Possessed Scabs and Prized Amalgams and an Olivia. And Prized Amalgams we can get straight back with a Reanimate spell, so our creatures are really hard to get rid of, which is awesome. Necromantic Summons, the second best Reanimate spell in this deck, I'd call it. Put target creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Spell Mastery, which is always going to be online for the most part, because we're going to be self-milling for quite some time as well, so we only need 2 instants and sorceries in our graveyard at the time of casting it to get an additional 2 1/1 counters on a creature, so that makes our Linvala 7/7, Emeria Shepherd 6/6, so on and so forth. Gets us out of Languish range for a lot of our creatures. Great little Reanimate spell. 3 of as well. I did cut down one of the Rise from the Graves. Rise from the Grave is essentially a Necromantic Summons without the bonus of the 1/1 counters. So put a creature from the graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It is black and a zombie in addition to its other colours and types. I'm not sure that ever comes into sorry. I'm not sure that ever comes into play at any point. I haven't noticed it anyway. I suppose maybe we could have had Compelling Deterrence, the 2-mana blue instant. That one. I suppose we could make use of that with a Rise from the Grave, but just eh. So, on to our creatures that we'll be reanimating. Linvala the Preserver, a 6/6 for 5/5 for 6, should I say. Flying, whenever it enters the battlefield, if an opponent has less life than you, you gain 5 life. Or more life than you, sorry. Very likely to occur. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more creatures than you, put a 3/3 White Angel. Very likely to occur, because we only need 1 good creature on the battlefield for the most part, because we're getting them down super early, so a lot of our opponent's creatures will end up being chump blockers in our deck anyway. Unless it's aggro decks. This deck, by the way, does not do very well against aggro. Not at all. If you hit a Languish and a Planar Outburst, then you might be fine, but you'll be on death's door at that point. Ever After, the best Reanimate spell. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then yet again, they're black and zombie in addition to their other types. This one has the advantage of being put back into our deck, so we have, in theory, infinite Reanimate spells in our deck. Not in practice though, because we will mill these eventually with pieces of the puzzle and stuff like that. It does happen. If it gets countered as well, it goes into our graveyard. I haven't played against the controlled deck yet, actually, so we'll hopefully get to see how that plays out. I imagine... actually, no. I did play against one control deck, and he tapped out at the wrong point, and we ever aftered an Ulamog and an Olivia back, and got a Prized Amalgam back with it, and absolutely destroyed him. because he let his guard down for 1 turn, and we took advantage of that, and we only need 1 turn to take advantage of a misplay, and the game's over for our opponent, because he wants to keep these big creatures off. And we have a few that are very difficult to get rid of as well. Sorin Grim Nemesis, so 6 mana for a 6 loyalty Planeswalker. Reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to its converted mana cost. We have a very high curve, which means Sorin's +1 is going to be doing 7, it's going to be doing 10, you know, 5, 4, that kind of thing. It's going to be doing a lot of damage. You can hit a land on it and it does nothing, but a lot of the time we're going to hit very, very, very expensive cards, and that's good for us. We do need a way to discard them if they are big creatures though, but we do have plenty of ways to do it. Sometimes we get a little screwed on that, but what I found that I use most of all with Sorin is because most of the time we're on death's door by the end of it and we need to stabilize, I end up using Sorin's minus ability quite a fair bit. So he does X damage to target creature or planeswalker and you gain X life. So it's a drain spell essentially. I -5 him quite a lot just to destroy a creature and gain 5 life and get us out of that tough spot. Sorin as well, we tend to grab alongside Emeria Shepherd. So we tend to have a big blocker to keep Sorin alive. So his minus ability is sort of a double protection spell. A lot of Planeswalker cards have an ability on them that keeps them safe. You know, it either creates a token as a blocker or it destroys a creature. Same situation with Sorin. He'll destroy a creature, but most of the time we'll have him with Emeria Shepherd, so we'll have like pseudo 2 blockers with it, you know, that kind of thing. We've looked at Emeria Shepherd. Gaia's Revenge, one of the favourite reanimates for me. It can't be countered, though that'll never come into play because we don't have green mana in the deck. But it is a hasty 8/5 and cannot be the target of non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources. This card is impossible to get rid of outside of combat for the most part. It could be fought away with a fight mechanic, but you're going to lose a creature doing it. It comes out hasty as well. It can come out as a 10/7 if you've got a Necromantic Summons. With Emeria Shepherd, we can keep recurring them. We can throw them in our opponent's way, play a planes and get them straight back. That kind of thing. Absolutely fantastic card. Probably one of the key reanimate cards alongside Emeria Shepherd. Omnath, Locus of Rage. So, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. When Omnath or another elemental you control dies, it deals 3 damage to target creature or player. This card gets out of control really fast. So let's have a little scenario, shall we? Turn 5 we play Emeria Shepherd. Turn 6 we get Omnath out. Turn 7 Evolving Wilds, get a 5/5, crack the Evolving Wilds, get another 5/5, we grab a plains, we get a Gaia's Revenge or an Ulamog. Pretty soon we've got an overwhelming board. It's just that good. Final card in the deck is Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, one of my favourites and a favourite for a lot of ramp decks. When you cast Ulamog, exile 2 target permanents. Potential, unlikely though. Mostly it's in here because it's indestructible and it has the potential to kill our opponent in 2 turns depending on when it comes down. If it comes down early it's 3, but for the most part 2 turns. When it attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of his or her library. It's a really hard creature to get rid of based on the fact that it is out of burn range for most spells, especially if we're getting it down on turn 6. There's no mass X burn spell that can take us out at that point. It's also indestructible, so only things like Oblivion Strike is going to take care of Ulamog, some enchantment removal, that kind of thing. Very hard to get rid of. And it's not the end of the world if we lose him either, because as you can see we've got plenty of alternatives. So on to the mana base. The mana base is quite interesting, having to have an Emeria out. We do skew heavier into the plains despite the fact that we only play an Emeria Shepherd and a Linvala and a Planar Outburst. The only reason we really want white other than to get Emeria triggers is to Planar Outburst. So we want to play up to 2 mana and then just hold the rest of the planes in our hand for when we've got an Emeria Shepherd, unless we need the mana. So that's why there's 6 in here. And then we've got 4 islands, 4 swamps, nice even skew. We have Evolving Wilds to grab whichever ones we want. Evolving Wilds can grab planes as well. That's 2 triggers for an Emeria Shepherd. So we could use the Evolving Wilds to get back an Oath of Jace that we can play, crack it, get a planes, get back a Guy's Revenge, that kind of deal. Sunken Hollow, probably a really good dual card in this deck. It's an island and a swamp. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Very likely to be the case. I don't often see a tapped land come into play unless it comes in with the Evolving Wilds. Or that we're playing this turn 1. That's usually the case. Prairie Stream, a Plains Island, dual land. Yet again, triggers Emeria Shepherd, gets back more permanents back to the battlefield. It's also a dual land. Absolutely fantastic. Drownyard Temple, we do a lot of self-milling, so that's why this is in here. It's actually a form of ramp if we get it in quite soon, because we can pay 3 and return it from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and it's also a colourless mana for that for the time being as well. So it's a really good card. We can also discard this to an Oath of Jace and stuff like that and easily get it back. It's not the end of the world if we're discarding a land, you know, even if we're like mana screwed or something like that and Drownyard Temple's in our hand, we can still afford to get rid of it, on the condition, of course, that we can pay the 3 mana to return it. Rogue's Passage, it's a one-off because it has some one-off situations. We don't want to go too heavily into colourless mana, even though we technically only have 3. But I didn't want to cut out any more plains or any more islands or swamps, so I figured I'd only go for a 1. It's great because it allows us to make Ulamog unblockable. It allows us to make Omnath unblockable. We can't target Guy's Revenge, of course, because it can't be the target of non-green spells or abilities for any source, you know. But mostly it's in there to make our big creatures able to take that final blow. Doesn't come up as often as you might hope, but, you know. And finally, Evolving Wilds, 4 of, because we have 3 colours in our deck that we want to grab. We also want to be able to grab planes and get 2 triggers from our Emeria Shepherd and our Omnath as well. We have a few, those 2 are the best landfall creatures. They're the only landfall cards, funnily enough, in our deck. So 2 triggers on a turn is absolutely fantastic, and we want to take advantage of that whenever we can. But that's the deck, guys, so be sure to check out the matches that should be following shortly after, or might already be up at this point. If you've enjoyed the content, then be sure to leave a like. If you've loved the content, then be sure to subscribe. But if you're not quite sure, stay for the end card, see the rest of the content I've got to offer. And as always, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.